So guys, I was just explaining if you weren't on, Eric's going to be a little bit late. So I'm going to pull up, we're going to kind of continue contracts discussion. Last time we got through the purchase contract and kind of ended right on that. And Eric thought he was going to go through some more forms. So we're going to go through some of the addenda that are kind of like a little unique and how to use those. So if you guys are ready to get rolling. And Shantae and Nate up there in Oregon, obviously your contracts are a little bit different. I mean, I'm sure you have similar clauses, similar terms and conditions in your paperwork, but obviously it's going to be slightly different. Understood there. So let me see if I can find my. Okay, so do you see where it says forms library right here? You see my screen? Okay, cool. So at least for you guys here in Utah, I'm on the MLS, utahrealestate.com. Go to forms library and you have, here's all our forms right here. Let me see if I can move this up. All of our forms, they have them categorized. Here's all our listing forms. Here's the buyer forms. Lots of them, right? A couple of miscellaneous ones that aren't used as often. Then there's some Utah Association of Realtors addendums that also have, and these are a couple of the ones that we're going to look at that kind of come up from time to time, but they're not as standard as all of these forms in the buyer forms. And then of course there's leasing, and then some MLS board related forms. So when you guys are, well, first of all, does anybody have anything else they want to talk about, questions, comments about today's training? I'm just kind of like ripping into this. And so I'm sorry if I didn't give anybody the opportunity to pipe in here. Everybody good? All right, you're a quiet bunch. Okay. So for you guys using at least our format here, Shantae and Nate, maybe you have something similar. We can go through, and I've already selected a couple of here when Eric told me he wasn't going to be on the beginning of the call. I knew what his intention was, so I came into the MLS and I clicked a couple. All these pluses right here, so you can add any of these forms you want or subtract them to this selection of forms here. So let's say you're doing a purchase contract, you know you're going to need a blank addendum. So you can come up here and get an addendum to the REPSI and add that in there. Maybe you've got earnest money to be deposited at a title company, whatever that is, you know, is going to be part of your original offer. You can put together here and then you can actually create it into a packet. So now you've got all these forms together. This isn't really what we're talking about. I just figured I'd show you this step while we're going here. So once you have this packet, here's our drop-down menu of what we added to that packet. We can also go here and it'll take us right back to where we were, to where we could sort our contracts any order that we want, or we can add new ones and then we hit save and we come back and we've got our pack. I like to do that because I like my purchase contract to be first. I like my addendum to be second. Then if there's a lead-based paint addendum, you might have an FHA addendum. Earnest money disclosure would be last. I like to just sort them in an order that makes sense to read the offer, right? So one other little tip before we kind of go through some of the clauses on here, right here where it says auto-populate forms, this is kind of a handy feature, especially since forms there, to preload data. If you've got a listing, Eric's already showed us this before when we were doing the REPSI, but don't forget you can like put in your buyer's name, the seller's name, address, all of that preload from an MLS right there, and then you don't have to do it on every form. So who knows what a time clause is on an offer? Those of you that have written offers before or maybe at least heard about it, anybody know what a time clause means? Nobody? Anybody?
That means that a particular condition has to be met within a certain time frame. Is that right?
Yep. And this is a very specific condition. So this particular form, maybe as you're searching for properties, you've seen on the status, active properties is generally what we're looking for. We can also search for backup under contract sold, but there's also one that says active TC. The TC is for time clause. The TC means that there's a time clause that can be given to the buyer to remove a contingency. So DL, you're right. There's a very specific clause on here. And a lot of times that condition will be, let's say a buyer puts an offer in on a house and they can't close on that house unless they sell their house. It may or may not be on the market already. It might be under contract. It might be 2 days away from closing, but at any rate, they can't close on the purchase of the offer they're making unless they sell their house. Well, that would be a pretty big contingency that might hold a seller back from accepting that offer, particularly if it's not even on the market yet, right? You've got 2 or 3 offers to choose from. One has to sell a house before they can buy yours. Another one is like, hey, we can close in 3 weeks. Another one's, maybe a month or whatever. And they all have different contingencies in their offer. So it's not as likely in this market for a seller to wait for somebody to sell their house. So it's super, super important if you've got a sell by client that you try and get that house on the market, ideally have it under contract before a seller is really going to take their offer serious. So let's just kind of look through this. Typically this might be a counter offer, right? You submitted an offer subject to you having to sell your house, or your client subject to them selling their house. Maybe that's the only offer the seller has. So they says, you know what, I'll go ahead and move forward with you and you can start doing your due diligence and whatnot. But I want to continue to market the property. So they might counter offer you with this time clause. So they're going to counter offer you and reference, of course, the offer date on the offer you sent them, the parties, the address. Here's what the time clause is. Section 1, they have the option to keep the house on the market. The right to accept other offers. Buyer and seller agree that seller may continue to offer the property for sale and accept any backup offer. Seller, in seller's sole discretion, may notify buyer in writing of an accepted backup offer. So see, a backup offer doesn't do anything to the original offer, right? Because as that clause states, they put them in backup position. Section B says buyers have the right to remove conditions. If seller does provide written notice to buyer, then buyer shall have, this is either a number of days or whatever, of receipt of the seller's written notice to provide written notice to seller of buyer's removal of the following conditions from the REPC. So let me back up on the backup offer. A normal backup offer is in a secondary position. In this case, they can't really accept a contract because they're already under contract with you. Can't be under contract with 2 offers. So they will accept that offer in backup, which means they become the primary offer upon, the removal of the primary offer, which in this case is you. So they accept them in backup. Now they're going to give you, let's say 72 hours or 3 days after they've given you written notice to remove your condition. So the conditions that need to be removed is due diligence, appraisal condition, financing if appraisal. Wait a minute, this is a little bit different. They just revised this in July. So sorry if I'm a little bit off. This is a new form that I haven't used since July.
That's the biggest issue, isn't it? That they are always changing these forms.
Yep. And that's why we pull them from the MLS. In the old days, I used to have like packets saved, right? Or maybe even printed out if I wanted to have some in the car with me. Or I would have just a saved template as a PDF that I would just go to. Can't do that anymore because when they change these, like this is a different format. I just got stumped as I'm looking here because one of the selections on the other form is specifically what I'm talking about. The most common contingency that really makes people use this time clause is when somebody has to sell a house. So if it's subject to the sale of the buyer's house, that's a big one. And that's usually, that was on the old form. So I didn't see it on here and I got a little bit confused. So we're kind of going through this one together because I haven't really used this one. So basically what the time clause means is if the buyer does not remove the condition, then the seller has the right to move forward with the other offer that they got. Okay, the time clause, so within 72 hours. So they can't really remove a condition of having to sell a house unless they make other arrangements, have a backup plan, like they could pay cash, but they don't really want to pay cash. In that case, I would probably want to see proof of funds that they can remove that condition. If they're saying, well, the lender says we can qualify without having to sell our house now, where the offer said you have to sell your house before you can buy this. Again, I'm going to want validation. Otherwise, I'm staying under contract with somebody that might be removing that condition and still has financing or appraisal or something else to fall back on that they could cancel on me later. So me personally, I want to get a little bit of validation on the removal of that condition.
So barring the removal of the condition, when that time clause expires, the seller has the right to accept the backup offer.
Correct. So if the clause or whatever that contingency is that the time clause was issued on, if they don't remove it, then they get to move forward with the other offer. Okay. So let's read this together since this is completely different than the other one. So let's back up a little bit. Obviously, the seller has the right to receive other offers. Okay. That's why you'll see active TC. The property's still active. All their marketing's in play. It's still showing up on all the syndicated websites. People are seeing it as something they can put an offer on. Also, there's a status, and I'm jumping to a side note here, but you can put a property in backup status, meaning you're looking for a backup offer. It doesn't mean you have a time clause. It just means, hey, who knows? You know, in this market, who knows what's going to happen to the buyer? We might lose them. So I want a backup offer in place just in case. So the backup status is kind of nice because you can still market the property. And when it's in backup, it still shows up as well on all of the syndicated websites that people search for properties on, all the IDX feeds to all the other agents use on their personal websites. Because when you change it to under contract, it's no longer visible on those public facing sites. But active TC and backup it is, okay? So if you're doing a time clause, you're saying I have the right to keep it on the market. Buyer's right to, let's back up. So that's the right to accept other offers, and they will notify the buyer in writing if they receive a backup offer. Buyer's right to remove the conditions. If seller does provide written notice to buyer, then buyer shall have X amount of days after the receipt of seller's written notice to provide written notice. Receipt of seller's written notice to provide written notice to seller of buyer's removal of the following conditions. So due diligence, appraisal, and financing, to me, financing and, oh, here it is right here. I skipped right over there. You guys probably read this and were thinking I was crazy. Financing and, if applicable, subject to the seller buyer's primary property condition. That's the biggest one you're going to see this on. So
is that what the TC means? Or what does the TC actually stand for?
That's for time clause.
Oh,
so
time
clause just means I'm not just going to cancel you. So Kim, you put an offer on my property and you have this contingency. Your buyer has to sell his house, whether they're under contract, on the market or not, it doesn't matter. They have to close on their house before your buyer can buy my listing. So we're counter offering you and say, you know what, we're going to keep it on the market, subject to a time clause, and continue to look for other offers. If I find another offer just as good or better than yours, I'm going to activate my time clause. Okay, that's what this is down here. I'm going to put something in here like that says days. You can see my preset thing in there was hours. So I could write in maybe 72 hours here. This says days, so maybe this is going to be 3, right? Whatever that might be. Your buyer, let's say they really want to remove that contingency, but maybe the appraisal on your buyer's property hasn't even been done yet. So you don't know if your buyer is going to cancel because you're not through all that yet. So there's varying degrees there that we might stay under contract. If your due diligence is done for your buyer, your appraisal's done, your financing conditions been met, and you've got $10,000 earnest money that's gone hard from your seller, and I may even ask permission to talk to the lender of your buyer. Hey, how solid is everything going? And he's going to tell me they're in underwriting. We're going to close next week, blah, blah, blah. I probably am not going to boot you out, right? Because now I got to start all the way over with another buyer. So just because you have a time clause doesn't mean you have to activate it. The time clause gives you the right. But let's say you were the only offer I got on that property and you were still marketing your property and you weren't under contract yet. Now we're really early in the game, right? So now I get another offer and you don't even have a contract yet. I'm going to probably exercise my time clause and ask you to remove that condition, or I'm going with the other buyer that doesn't have a house to sell. So the further along you can get your seller, the better presentation of your offer and likelihood that they're even going to go under contract with you, right? It's not very likely, especially brand new on the market, that they're going to go under contract with you, even with a time clause, if it's their first weekend and they're getting multiple offers. You're just not going to stack up next to the other offers, right? Like I got my listing that I went up on Thursday. I got multiple offers this weekend. One of them put down $50,000 earnest money, which to me, that agent's going to protect the earnest money anyway, right? So whether it's $5,000 or $50,000 isn't as relevant to me as the professional, but my seller psychologically thinks, oh wow, they're a serious buyer. They're putting down a lot of earnest money. But the thing that they did that made their offer stronger than some of the other ones is $10,000 of their earnest money was going to be non-refundable after the due diligence. That's prior to the financing condition, prior to the appraisal even being done. Once due diligence was done, they're releasing $10,000 to my client. That's a pretty good clause to put in there, and a risk on their point or part to make my client choose their offer over the other 8 that I got, right? So back to the time clause. Yeah, it really depends on where the buyer is that submitted the offer, whether you are going to actually exercise the time clause or not. Does that all make sense? Okay, cool. Let's move on to C. We don't want to spend all the whole time on this one. In addition to removing the above check conditions, buyer agrees to deposit an additional earnest money deposit in the amount of X. Buyer shall deposit the additional earnest money deposit into the same location as the earnest money within 4 calendar days of removing the above check condition. So again, this is a counter offer. If you receive this DL for your buyer and you can remove this condition because your lender says, hey, the appraisal's done, financing's done, we're in underwriting, you can actually remove the condition that you have to sell the property because your conditions have been met. Maybe you're going to close in 2 days, right? So if the seller's asking you to deposit additional earnest money as well, you don't necessarily have to accept that, okay? Because your buyer is closing in 2 days, but you might not be slated to close until, you know, further out, right? So that would be another term that would just be negotiable, whether or not you put in additional earnest money along with, you know, removing your contingency. Let's see, D, buyer's right to not remove conditions. If buyer does not remove from the REPC the above check conditions within the term specified in section 1B, it's right here, of this addendum, then the REPC will automatically become canceled, in which instance the earnest money deposit or deposits shall be released to the buyer. So that's basically the seller kicking you out, what you were just asking, Kim. Or DL, if that time clause expires, what happens? You're out because you didn't remove your contingency. So if you don't perform, it's over. You can have your earnest money back because your offer was subject to sell your primary residence and that didn't happen. So you get your earnest money back, but you're done. I'm moving forward with another offer.
Just really quick on 1C, additional earnest money. I'm guessing that's probably commonly used these days. If you have a motivated buyer, they want to make sure that their offer is getting maximum consideration. So it's probably more common for them to be putting down additional earnest money. Is that right?
That would be on the REPC, on the purchase contract we went over last week, that there is a section for you to put up additional earnest money after the expiration of your deadlines. Yeah, this one's actually coming back to you if you're representing the buyer from the seller. The seller is typically the one presenting the time clause as a counteroffer. However, you're right. You could just include this with your offer. You know what? Hey, we got to sell our house. So I'm going to include an addendum subject to the sale of my buyer's primary residence. I also anticipate they're going to want a time clause. So technically you could check addendum on this and submit it with your offer to make it more appealing for the seller to just accept your offer. So this might be an instance where you as the buyer's agent would say, you know what? Once we remove this condition, we will also add $5,000 earnest money, additional earnest money, something like that. So you're right, it could go in the reverse, and that could be an enticement for the seller to move forward with you. Okay, any other questions on that form? And obviously, if this comes up, you're gonna have a conversation with somebody. We're gonna collaborate on the offer. You've got Eric and I and others on the team that you can say, hey, what would you do in this case? Or I wanna put in an offer, but my client has to sell their home. And we can certainly brainstorm, because every offer is a little bit different. Every buyer situation is a little bit different. Earnest money capabilities, all that's different. So let's just brainstorm and find the unique situation and craft the best offer for your client when the situation arises. But that, to me, I mean, that's pretty common, or I mean, pretty straightforward, that a time clause just means you have the right to bump out one buyer and accept another one. Okay. Let's look at another form. Let's see what I got on here. Actually, the next one here's the subject of the sale of buyer's property. And this is another one that changed in July. Now, I don't like this change. I noticed this one when I was saving the forms. And I'll explain to you why as we go through here. You can see subject to the sale of the buyer's property. This is an addendum that you got to include on there. It's not really ethical, or it wouldn't be right for you to submit an offer knowing that your clients have to sell a property or they cannot perform. Ethically, you need to disclose if you're aware of any material facts that would affect the ability of your buyer to perform. You shouldn't withhold that from the other side, right? Just like you wouldn't want it withheld from you. Let's say, for instance, a buyer or a buyer's agent might not want to disclose that because their offer might not get accepted. Maybe they're close to closing and they say, you know what, let's just put our due diligence deadline to a point where we can cancel on due diligence if our house doesn't sell. It's a little bit shady. I mean, due diligence means you can cancel for any reasons, but it's usually targeted at your due diligence of the property you're buying, right? Not on your condition to be able to perform as a buyer. And so you should, if this is the case for your buyer, include this form, okay? So you'd put on there the offer reference date. Again, you all know how to do an addendum, who the parties are, and the location of the property. So buyer's obligation to purchase the property is conditioned upon the closing of the sale of the buyer's property located at, you put the address there. This condition is referred to below as subject to sale of buyer's primary residence. What I liked about the other form is right after this, subject to the sale of the buyer's property at, on, or before blank date. So I'll show you why this form's different. I like that because normally I'm going to submit an offer and maybe I just went under contract or I just listed my property. So my buyer, if I'm under contract, isn't going to close, let's say, for 3 weeks. 3 to 4 weeks, and right away I find your home and I want to put an offer on your home. That subject to the sale of my property has to be out at least as long as the contract date, right, of my buyer that's going to close. And so I'm going to say, I'm going to do my due diligence anyway. I'm going to get my financing all squared away. I'm going to do the appraisal. All those conditions can be met. The only thing that still has yet to occur is the subject of, subject to the sale of my property, because I can perform everything else, make the seller happy, but I can't dictate whether or not my buyer's going to cancel or not. So usually that date comes after. But as I was looking at this, and again, we're going through it for the first time because I just pulled it up and noticed this is another updated form that I have not used since July. It says the buyer's right to cancel before the due diligence deadline, okay? Or the financing appraisal, whichever is later. So if I cancel before one of my deadlines, let's say I'm the buyer's agent, buyer may cancel in buyer's sole discretion if the buyer has not closed on the sale of buyer's property by providing written notice to the seller no later than the due diligence deadline referenced in section 24B or the financing appraisal deadline referenced in 24C. This is referring to the Rep C, last page of the Rep C, whichever is later. Whereupon the earnest money deposit shall be released to the buyer without further written authorization. So here's the key. Here's the difference between these two things. In this case, you're not canceling because the property didn't appraise. You're not canceling because you didn't get the loan. Your buyer might have backed out and now you have no buyer. So even if the house you're trying to buy appraises and you can get the loan, you can't perform because you lost your buyer. So you can cancel. What you would probably do first, prior to any cancellation, is renegotiation, right? If I lost a buyer, I might, even if I got a time clause on there, right? I might renegotiate and say, hey, I lost my buyer. Can we extend these deadlines another 30 days or whatever? Give me an opportunity to get another buyer. I'd still like to buy your house. Now, if they don't have another buyer in line or somebody that they can put in your place right away, they might agree to that. But they also might want to advertise the property as active and just say, yeah, we lost our buyer, they couldn't perform, and just get a new primary. I don't see why they wouldn't accept a time clause in this case, and because they can still market the property. But if you cancel because the house didn't sell, then your buyer gets the earnest money. If they're not willing to extend, then you have to go look for another property. So item B though says the right to cancel after. So this one was before. This one is if you cancel after the due diligence deadline. Okay, if the buyer does not cancel the REPSLI by the due diligence deadline or the financing appraisal deadline, whichever is later, and has not closed on the sale of buyer's primary residence, then buyer may cancel this REPSLI on or prior to the settlement. That's our very last deadline, right? So on or before the settlement deadline, but by providing written notice to the seller, whereupon the earnest money or deposits shall be released to the seller. So the buyer is going to lose their earnest money in this case. Without further written authorization from the buyer, seller agrees to accept as seller's exclusive remedy the earnest money deposit or deposits if applicable as liquidated damages. So the reason I don't like this one is in the prior addendum, I could be beyond my due diligence, beyond my financing appraisal deadline, and still haven't sold my house. So I want that date. In the example I gave you, maybe the date is after my appraisal is already done, that the buyer is supposed to buy my house so that I can buy yours. So I still had the right to cancel and protect my buyer's earnest money after financing and appraisal and after due diligence. Do you see in this case right here, if I cancel after the last of those deadlines, but prior to the settlement, I lose my earnest money.
Can that be mitigated with an addendum?
Possibly this. Now here's the thing. So these addenda that are provided for us by the Utah Association of Realtors, if provided, we're supposed to use them. If we're making up our own terms and our own language, which we do all the time, to be honest with you, when we write something on an addendum, it's like, hey, here's one term of this offer. Technically, we could be construed as acting as an attorney, right? We don't want to be in that case. So what I would do is I would include this addendum, include this addendum that says subject to the sale of buyer's property with these terms, then put another addendum behind it. And then DLU, what you would do and what you're thinking is on that addendum, you'd say in reference to section 1B of subject to sale of buyer's primary addendum, you could change this to say, put a date in there different, that earnest money would be non-refundable, like a closing date that used to be on the last addendum. Because your job is to protect your client's earnest money. If you're going under contract and they've got to sell their house and it's not going to close till after you're going to do financing appraisal, then you know what I would do if I was just using this one? I would make my financing and appraisal deadline the date that the property's supposed to close. Because what could I do then? If the property didn't sell, I may not cancel because of the subject to sell a property, but I can't buy the house, so I can cancel based on financing, right? So that's a long financing deadline that may or may not be accepted. It really is going to depend on the needs of the seller, because that's all a contract is bringing a meeting of the minds between the buyer and the seller. And if it works for both of you, it does. But what your buyer needs in this type of a market may not be acceptable to a seller. So I'll tell you, if you're working with somebody that has to sell a house that wants to buy another one, they're at first a lot of times going to say, let's go and find the house that I want before I put my house on the market, because I don't want to be homeless. I don't want to find a buyer for mine and I can't find anything. Now you're in the situation where you're putting in offers on properties and you haven't even listed their house yet. So you can see how that would be a pretty strong reason for a seller not to accept your offer. So I encourage your clients, even though a lot of them will have to lose a couple of offers before reality sinks in and they actually realize that they got to get their house on the market. Now, just because they put their house on the market, you're going to explain to them, because they don't want to be homeless. So just because you receive an offer on your property as a seller, this is kind of a side note, but it's relevant. If they need to sell their house to buy the next one, you put the house on the market and you get an offer, your only choice isn't to accept or reject that offer, right? You can counter offer. So I'll give you an example based on the one I just mentioned, the $50,000 earnest money that they put down, 10,000 non-refundable. I still counter offered them. Not only did I counter offer them on price, but I put in place a 60-day short-term lease back, because in this case, my client is going out to buy another house and he hasn't even started shopping yet, because we had this discussion. I need to get you under contract before a seller is going to take you serious. If you're not even under contract and we don't have deadlines when that sale is going to happen, it's just kind of like, well, we hope we get an offer, right? So now I can say we're under contract. You can go ahead and vet out our buyer if you want. I'll get permission for you to call the lender. You can call their agent. We just went under contract yesterday, okay, literally. So we're not very far along in the process. They may not accept my offer. However, if my buyer that's buying my listing does their due diligence and financing appraisal done, as you can see, as I get further along the timeline, they're more likely to accept my offer. So here's why I did the lease back though. I now have 90 days. So I have the freedom to wait. Well, we're still looking at properties, but I have the freedom to wait until due diligence is done, financing appraisal done, even the house closes. Now I still have 60 days to stay in the house. Now my offers are not subject to the sale of my primary residence because it's closed. And my client and their family still lives in the house. So I gave him options by counter offering the offer with that lease back. So let's just say we just play it out and we let that offer or the sale of our house close. Now it's a done deal. Now I still have a whole month to shop because I have a 60-day lease back, right? And most closings are going to take place within 3 or 4 weeks of my offer. So if I go under contract any day within that first 30 days, I can still close within 60 days, right? And I'm still living in the property. On top of that, I get to give notice on when I'm moving out. Does that make sense? So all of these clauses are going to correlate with a counter or an alternative or some way to avoid it, right? I don't like this, having to use this in a total seller's market, because I know sellers don't like it. I'm explaining to you for what it is, and then how can we get around it? So I just gave you one example with my client. We got a 2-month lease back after it closes. Does that make sense?
So I'm pretty sure I understand what's going on here. If you could just explain who, regarding the lease back, who's getting that time cushion to stay in their property?
The seller. So in the example I'm giving you, I'm representing the seller. We're selling the property, but we're going to go buy another one, which we haven't bought yet. So I would be in the situation where I would need to use this addendum, right? Because their house hasn't sold and they can't buy the next one until it does. That's what this addendum's for. You're putting an offer on a property where your client has to sell their house before they can buy that. That's the situation I'm in right now. I want to help him go find his replacement property, but his has to close first. So we put it on the market. We got our offers. We countered offered it and put us in a situation where the buyer wants our property bad enough. They were competing against eight, 9 offers, right? We selected them on the condition that they had flexibility to let us stay in the property after they buy it for 60 days.
That's beautiful.
Okay, and that's one of these clauses as well. You can go back to these, and this can be one that we go over. I'm getting kind of long-winded on these other ones, but I hope Eric's really better than me at talking slow and explaining things better. So if I'm talking too fast and I'm not making any sense, interrupt me, slow me down, make me explain it in more detail. But so we look.
Are you finding with this new version of the form that buyers you're having to do an addendum to protect, if you're representing the buyer, to protect their earnest money? on that, what was it, 1B or C, so that they don't lose, their earnest money?
I would, depending on the date on which their property is going to sell. Like if you're putting in an offer and they're closing in a week anyway, right? Then you may not need a date beyond due diligence deadline. If you're putting in an offer, it's subject to the sale. Let's say you're representing the buyer, DL, and your buyer's house is on the market. It's under contract. It's today's Tuesday. It's supposed to close next Tuesday, okay, in 1 week. And you put 10 days on your offer to buy the next property as your due diligence period. So that sale of the property is to happen within your due diligence, right? So that's a totally different situation. You wouldn't need to adjust any dates. But let's say you just went under contract, like I did. I just went under contract yesterday on my client's house. And now we want to go look at houses. I'm not that far along, but I want to be expedient in moving forward with whatever offer we're going to put on the house, to do our inspections, to order the appraisal and move things along to make the seller happy, right? But if and the way you're thinking in regards to this clause is, if I'm fast on due diligence, financing, and appraisal, and those deadlines have expired, but my house hasn't sold yet, they're going to lose their earnest money unless I correlate these dates. I could put in some sort of verbiage that used to be in the last addendum, or I could simply put my financing appraisal deadline out to maybe be the closing date that's on the contract on the your client's property that they're selling. Does that make sense? So normally you might put 3 weeks on a financing and appraisal deadline, or maybe even tighter if you're trying to be competitive, but you might put it out over 3 weeks, somewhere between 3 and 4 weeks, because that's when your property is supposed to close. It has to close before you can close on the purchase, on the offer you just put in. Did I make that more confusing, or does that make sense? Anybody else on that one? Eric, how are you?
I'm here, buddy. Sorry I'm late.
I just hit my drop down menu on the video, see who was on the call, see if anybody had any questions, and there you are. Glad you made it.
Yeah, me too. Sorry I was running late.
No worries. So we started with the time clause addendum. And ironically, both these are new forms as of July, and I've never used either one of them. So I'm bumbling a little bit, but it's kind of nice because I went from the time clause addendum to subject to sale of buyer's property, which is a big clause on why somebody might use the time clause addendum, right? So that's where we're at, is just kind of wrapping up subject to sale of a buyer's property addendum.
Perfect. Sounds like you're doing awesome.
Kick back, interrupt, and help me out when needed.
That's Eric's way of saying he wants you to just continue doing your good work.
He's like, I'm on mute, dude. My mic's not working. Just keep on doing what you're doing. So if there anything else on that one, anybody have any scenarios or questions that might come up on that one? Good. Okay, let's see what we got next. How about this one on the other end? I've never used this one. I probably never will, just as a side comment there. This one's on the opposite end, right?
Why wouldn't you use it?
Well, I'll tell you. Let's say you're representing a buyer. You put an offer on my listing. Your buyer's excited about the house. They want to move in. And I counteroffer you with this addendum and say, you know what? I love your offer. I'd like to go under contract with you, but I have a contingency for you. I can only sell this house to you if I find a replacement property. If I don't find a replacement property, I get a cancel on you. You're not going to feel very secure, or your buyer's not going to feel very secure that they've locked up that property. So you're under contract, but now the seller has a contingency. They've got to find a new residence, or they don't have to sell to you. So what are you going to do? You're going to keep looking for another house, right? Even if you say, okay, well, I'll accept this one. It'll just be there if we don't find something we love better. Probably. Why not? it's kind of like being in a backup position, right? Why not? Let's put it in backup, but we're going to still keep shopping because we have no guarantee that that primary buyer is going to back out, right? We may not even have a shot at it, even though contractually we're backup. Same thing. You may not even get a shot at buying this property if my picky, fussy seller hates everything they see on the market and says, you know what? I can't find anything I like. Let's just, so I'm just kick out this buyer. I'm not selling right now. I'll wait until next year. So that's why I would never use it, because
More tedium than it's worth.
it just doesn't give the buyer any confidence that this is their house. And to be honest, well, I guess I would, like I just said, I guess I'd go ahead and let them use this contingency, but I now have no confidence that I'm going to be able to buy this home, and I'm going to keep looking. So that's why I probably wouldn't use it. I would do something like the example I just gave you with I did with my last listing. I negotiated a 60-day lease back after they buy. That gives it, I'd rather have time to go find the new house rather than say, hey, I'm going to cancel your contract if I don't find what I want. That makes sense.
So on the note of people, and they kind of touched about on this today's training. So somebody wants to sell a property, but they're worried about what's available out there on the market. So how do you overcome the fear that they might have putting their property on the market, knowing that the supply and demand is an issue right now? So how do you overcome that objective without having to, like, I wouldn't want to bring this up to them and say, well, we could use this. I'd rather come up with another solution.
You're exactly right. You want them to know that they have options. And so counter offering the buyer with a lease back was our game plan all along. Okay. So we still have options. So I did a 60-day lease back. The reason it's a 60-day lease back, and I actually put it in here, it's a two-month short-term lease agreement, is because lenders, I think it says the dates on here. Oh, right here is where it says it. Less than 60 days. Now, why does it say that already? I mean, couldn't you do a 90-day, a 4-month? You want to lease the property through the winter or whatever? The reason this works on a REPC for a buyer is because or let's say my buyer, because my listing client just did this, right? That buyer has to get a loan. They're getting an owner-occupied loan. Part of that owner-occupied loan is they're agreeing to move into the property within 60 days. Okay? If they're not going to move in the property, it's a different loan product. It's an investor product. They're going to be a landlord. They're going to rent out the property. So the intent and the commitment to move into the property within a certain time frame is why they're getting the rate they're getting, the low down payment they're getting, if that's what they're choosing, right? They can put 3 to 5% down versus 20 because they're an owner occupant. You can't submit a 6-month or a year lease, on a contract on your offer and get an owner occupied loan. Okay. So leaving this at 60 days, that's why this standard form is set up that way, because 100% of the underwriters are probably going to accept it. Okay. So, and that's another thing. Always run things by your lender. Let me go back to that other one. Did that answer your question? So that's one option. So yeah, you could say, hey, seller, we'll just include addendum that we're going to accept their offer subject to you finding a suitable residence. Well, you got to be their advocate enough to explain to them what I just explained to you, that here's the pros and the cons to that. The buyer's not going to feel really secure. You know what? So they might start looking at another property. We go and find the house that we love. We call them up. Hey, we found our house. And they're like, oh, that's great. But you know what? We found another property. So we're just going to cancel based on our due diligence. Because
that's why the lease back was such a great solution.
It is a great solution. So there's another form that's a good solution. There's 2 of them that I use in this situation. One when I'm the seller, one when I'm the buyer. There's another addendum in here called the flexible settlement date addendum. flexible settlement date. We're not going to have time to go over all of these, obviously. It's already 10 to 8. So save this form again. We're creating a packet right here. Let's say, Kim, you've got the buyer and you call me. Well, maybe not me because I wouldn't do it. But let's say you call another agent and you say, hey, we just showed your property. We loved it. We saw 4 other homes tonight. This is the one they want. I'm on my way back to the office to write up an offer. And I hope you're going to do this on every time your client says, this is the one I want. And you're headed back. Remember last time Eric and I were talking about, you've got calls you're making along the way. You're checking with your home inspector, seeing how soon you can get a home inspection done. You're calling your lender, running the numbers. If it's right at the borderline of what they qualify for, making sure it fits. You're also calling the agent and asking them if they can share with you any situation that the seller might be in that will help you craft a better offer. And I always follow that up with, for instance, do they already know where they're moving? Have they already found their replacement property? Sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, they're going to move in with their family. They're building a home. They're going to build, it's not going to be ready till next year. They're moving in their parents' basement. Good. They just want to get this one done so it's out of the way, right? Other ones like, well, you know what? In this market, the scenario we were just talking about, they realize they got to get this one under contract before they can even go get an accepted offer on a property that they want to replace it with. So we really haven't even gone shopping yet because we just listed this property yesterday, right? So you might suggest, well, hey, what if I gave you guys some flexibility to go shopping? Normally I could close in 3 to 4 weeks, but what if we say, let's say today's September 22nd. What if I submit an offer that will close anywhere between October 22nd and November 22nd? I'll give you some flexibility to go shopping and I'll let you pick the date we close. So you're saying this to the listing agent, right? So and some of them have never heard of this before, so you've got to explain it to them. So the flexible settlement deadline, and it states right on here, unless this is another new form. Okay, right here, the exact date. Settlement shall take place between, so we're going to go out October 22nd. Let's just say November 23rd. It's right before Thanksgiving. How about we say the 20th? That's almost a month, right? We're going to close, and this would reflect the date on your REPC, right? Section 24D. This is your settlement deadline. This is now an addendum to your REPC, so it's going to replace that, right? It's changing what's on the prior contract or addendum. So now you're saying, okay, on the offer, we're going to close by the 22nd. Here's an addendum. We can close anywhere between the 22nd of October and the 20th of November. And you, seller, get to decide when we close by giving me 4 days notice. You might want to have 4 days notice so that your lender, everybody, closing disclosures can be issued and you've got your 3-day waiting periods and just make sure everything's buttoned up with underwriting and whatnot. But here's what that does. So now they've got a month. It's the same situation as my lease back, where if I close my house first, I've got 60 days lease, right? My house is already sold. My buyer doesn't have to put in a subject to offer anymore. He's got a full 30 days to go under contract because most of contracts close in 30 days, right? So I've got this sliding scale now where I can go under contract day 1, or maybe I go under contract day 23, and I'm still going to close within that window. Same thing for the buyer. They've got a contract now, at least in place with you, and they can go shopping and say, yeah, we've got to make our offer subject to sale of our primary residence, but we got a great buyer. We just went under contract, had multiple offers, have no doubt they're going to perform. Okay. This is what I would use if I was in the buyer side. And hopefully they accept it. The reason on the seller side, I use the short-term lease agreement is, let's say, well, let me go back to that form. Let's say I accepted this. Let's say I accepted this and I'm the seller, Kim, you're the buyer, and it's November 7th and your client loses their job. And they can't buy the house. and our settlement deadline goes out till November. So your client might lose their earnest money, but I lose the buyer. Now, if I'm under contract, I actually probably can't buy my house now and I have to start all the way over.
Right.
But if I was on if instead of accepting this as the seller, I leased it back, that means, nope, I want you to close on this date. I'll give you that. That's pretty standard. You close on that date, you lease it back to me. I know the closing's done, right? Because likewise is if I'm putting in an offer and I'm under this type of agreement, I still got to put in the offer subject to the sale of my house, even if it's in November, because we didn't close October 22nd. And so I can say to my seller that's listing the property I want to buy that, hey, it's pretty stable. The earnest money's hard. They're done with the appraisal and everything. I just need to give them 4 days notice and they're going to close and blah, blah, blah. It's not as secure as it's done. And I don't need to worry about somebody getting in a car wreck, losing their job. Something happens in their life that means they cannot perform during these 2 dates. Does that make sense?
No, because if the seller lost their job and they,
No, I'm talking about your buyer. Your
the buyer.
if I accepted this, your buyer lost the job. I'm the seller. I'm saying why I wouldn't want to accept this is your buyer might lose their job and can't buy my house. Now I can buy mine. Okay.
Yeah,
So
okay.
yeah, you're right. I mean, maybe I explained that backwards, but I was saying I wouldn't accept this as the seller because of that reason. Your buyer might lose their job after October 22nd. I would rather you close on October 22nd and give me a lease back.
Okay.
So I might present this to give just flexibility on the buying side, but I wouldn't accept it on the sell side.
Okay.
Okay, does that make sense? Eric, any comments on that?
I completely agree with that.
In other words, you're doing a great job. Keep going.
I like to get them. I like to get them closed when I'm on the seller side for sure. Yeah,
Absolutely.
because your job is to represent your seller and do the best job for them and look out for their best interests. And in that case, it is to close that property.
Yep.
I will make Jeff on one other point that you're going on that form that neither one of us like, the subject of finding a new residence.
Yes.
What I hate about this form is if you don't know this form is coming when you write your offer, and let's say you have a standard 32-day close and your due diligence is out maybe say 15 days, and you get this coming back to you, and the subject to seller acquiring a new residence is usually a couple weeks out. So now they can pull that property out from underneath you if they don't find something. Or maybe they put in 3 or 4 offers and they come in, they don't come in first place on those because it's a tough market. Now they don't have to sell you that property. We went over that already, but what does that put your buyer in a situation as? They've got to close in 30 days and they don't know if they have a house for 2 weeks. They still have to do their due diligence. They have to have their inspector come out. They have to order an appraisal to stay on target. So they could be in $800-900, maybe $1,000 to stay on schedule from your original offer, and the seller could still pull out.
So here's how I would counteroffer that. Eric, if you're the seller and you give me this addendum, to your point that you're making right now, the buyers are saying, God, we got to get on inspections. We got to get things rolling. We got to close in 30 days. Well, I can't commit to that for my client. I'm going to come from the buyer's perspective and I'm going to say, okay, we can make this subject to the sale of you acquiring a new residence. However, my timelines are going to start after the cancellation of this addendum. So upon cancellation of subject to seller acquiring new residence, buyer shall have 10 days due diligence from the date of cancellation. Buyer shall have, 14 days financing appraisal as of cancellation of this. So I probably wouldn't start any of that work, and that's fair. If you can cancel on me for any reason, why should you expect my client to pay for an inspection and appraisal?
Yep.
Right. So I'm going to bump everything out and say, okay, get your shit in order, go find your house, and then let's move about getting this one bought. Right.
Exactly. Certainly something to be aware of when you have that, because it puts the buyer in a really tough situation. You got to renegotiate.
Well, a tough situation and really a very non-committal situation to where they really can't feel like that it's going to be their house when that's, see, on the other side, we were talking about, hey, subject to buyer's residence, the seller has the time clause addendum, right? Maybe we could use the time clause and write something in there, say subject, I'm going to give you 72 hours to remove this contingency. You know, that would be nice. But the reason the sellers do that is because if the buyer's house doesn't sell and you can't buy it, well, they want another buyer. They don't want to wait on you and see if your house sells. So they're going to give you a time clause. I'll give you 48 hours or 72 hours to remove that. Show me that you can actually proceed without it, and I'll keep you in play. Or hopefully we're already past deadlines. Your earnest money is hard anyway, and I don't need to ask you to remove it. But if you're earlier in the game, I'm going to. What if I got a cash buyer, close in 7 days, and you haven't closed on your house yet? I want the right to move forward with that cash buyer, right? So yeah, I don't even like this one. I shouldn't even show it to you guys. Just don't use it.
Well, sometimes it comes across your desk when you don't expect it, though.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if you're a represented buyer and you put an offer and you get this back, it's like, what?
Yeah.
So,
Ugly.
Jeff, what jumps out at me about all this is that you mentioned you would reach out to the seller's agent and just ask, is there anything that we can know to help expedite this deal? And I've never thought of that. I've never heard anyone suggesting that. Who knows how many deals that you were able to seal that may have unwound otherwise because you opened your mouth and you asked the question.
Well, what you're doing is you're bringing up this concern that's a concern for the buyer, and you're resolving it for them with your offer. If you do your offer right, you're never going to get one of these, because you're already going to find out the needs of the seller and you're going to craft your offering to take care of their need, right? By doing a flexible settlement addendum, give them time to go shopping, right? They may not feel under the gun, or they might say, wow, what if I don't find something in 30 days? Okay, well, I'll give you the right to renew for 30 days. Always talk to your lender when you're talking about delayed closings like this, because they're wanting to lock in rates for your buyer's loan. You need to find out if they're doing a 30-day, 60-day, 90-day lock on that rate. Don't set them up to fail by their lender and you not communicating, and he puts them on a short-term rate lock, and you've got these extensions where the seller can string out the closing because you gave them a flexible settlement date. And you got to make sure that before you even present it, because obviously when you go under contract, you're going to send that to your lender and they're going to go, crap, man, that kind of puts me in a situation. But if you have that conversation with your lender, this is the plan. Now they're aware of it, they're geared up, and they're planning accordingly to move that file forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, right. Make sure that everybody's aligned on the timeline so that the numbers line up, and you don't have everything unwind as a result.
Exactly. So you got a couple of fallbacks, right? You could offer the flexible settlement date addendum if you want for your buyer. Or if they're not understanding that, or that doesn't quite sit with them like it wouldn't with me, you always got the lease back option to fall back on. It's like, okay, how about we close on it and we let you lease the property back? What you're doing is you're giving them some breathing room, because sellers are worried. And the reason I'm in the situation I am with that client right now is because that's what we plan to do from the beginning. It's like, let's not worry about it now. I'm not going to advertise that I need a lease back. I might eliminate some eyeballs on my listing, right? So somebody said, well, I want to move in now. I don't want to lease that back. I'm not even going to go see it. I want people to come and see it and fall in love with me and then have me bring up the lease back, right? That is a situation my seller might be in. And this buyer's agent did a good job. She called me. We had this conversation that may be coming, because I had 9 offers on the property, right? She was one. She wasn't even the highest. But I liked her, I liked her lender, I liked her buyer, I liked the presentation of the offer. We countered offered them and brought them up to the highest, and they accepted and our terms. So you got a lot of options when you've got multiple offers, but the key is protecting your client's interests, right? I mean, that's what it all comes down to. And we're at the top of the hour, so we don't really need to start another addendum, but That's what we are, guys, is protectors. And when you're on the buyer side, it's a different perspective. When you're on the seller side, it's a different perspective. So eliminate concerns from the other party when you can. By, like DL, like you were just saying, it's a great idea to call the seller and ask them what their needs are, because you just might be able to accommodate their needs, or you might bring up something that maybe that agent hadn't really thought of. And now you're presenting an option. They go, oh man, my clients they'll love that. Right. And now you're competing against other offers and you've catered to their needs and the other ones haven't. You know, out of the 9 offers I got on that property, 4 of the agents never even called me. They just, I mean, not even after they sent the offer. They just sent me an offer in my inbox. No follow-up text message to say you've received an offer. Let me know when you receive it. Please confirm receipt. Or no phone call prior to writing the offer for sure and asking how they can craft an offer. They just sent an offer. I got no communication from them. And 2 of them didn't even have a pre-approval letter. In this market.
Wow. That blows my mind. So they lost a deal for literally over nothing.
They weren't even a consideration. Yeah, and everybody was given the same right to do highest and best. We actually notified everybody and signed a multiple offer disclosure, and we signed the notice to buyers of multiple offers addendum. There's one of those in there too. Notify all buyers that there's multiple offers. You give them a date, and this is signed by the seller. You give them a date, usually the next day at whatever time you pick, to submit their highest and best offer. And those 4 that sent the offer didn't readjust their offer or didn't even respond to it. It's like they sent off the offer. I had no communication with them. I sent highest and best, no communication with them. All they got from me later when I was all done, and it took a while, was, sorry, but my client has elected to go forward with another offer. Good luck with your client. That was it. Crazy in this market to think that still happens, but it does.
Can I ask you, so regarding the lease back, and I'm sure I can see how that totally put the seller at ease. Were the buyers not in a situation where they had to move into a home right away? What was their situation?
No, they have a home that they're going to rent out. They're going to keep it and rent out. They don't have to sell it to qualify. So I talked to their agent. They're putting $150,000 down. This is the one that put $50,000 earnest money and $10,000 non-refundable after due diligence. Pretty strong offering right there, right? So good conversation with the lender, verified their income. I flat out asked them, hey, I want them to pay a higher price. I really like the agent. I really like the presentation of the offer. We've had a good conversation. I would like to counter offer your buyer, but they offered $660,000. Can he afford more? And he says, oh yeah, he can afford well over 700,000, but this, you know, he wants to stay in a lower price range for his payment or whatever. But he's talked to me about this house. He showed me the pictures of this house. If he doesn't buy this house, I want to buy this house type thing. So I would be willing to bet that he would be willing to go up, but I can't speak for him. So I thought that was a great response too. But now he gave me some info. He said he can afford it. But what if he was only qualified to 650 or 655 and they were stretching it somehow? He was going to get a credit back from the lender just to make it work and squeak by at 660. Then he wasn't my guy to counteroffer at 675, right? So when you're going to call all the lenders, when you get buyers, you're going to call the lenders, and we'll talk about it. DL, you're going to call and kind of vet out the buyers and how far, and the lender, how far along are they in the process? I had one that transparently told me that he's taken the application, he's looked at credit, but he hasn't received any documentation yet from his client, just the information he's provided on the application. He's not as far as long as the one that's been through underwriting already, right? And when you have multiple offers, you know, you're choosing the one that you think is going to be the smoothest transaction and get your client to the closing table. Those things matter.
This was absolutely awesome. I cannot thank you enough. I would love more of this.
But you got it. With more addenda we can go through, huh?
That's some good stuff, huh?
DL, to your conversation with me earlier, yes, we want to get through some of these addendums, but we will address your request to kind of just do a very basic MLS training. We'll get that on the agenda.
Yeah, we'll probably do that next week.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's awesome.
Cool. Does this help you guys?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Jeff.
Got it.
Good night.
Thanks, guys.
All right, if there's no more comments or questions, we'll sign off.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You guys have
See ya.
Good to see y'all. Good night.